5,000 yards? With that crosswind? Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not a shot, that's a prayer. My men are the best in the world, and even they wouldn't attempt that kind of miracle. This is a Trident-level problem, not a long-range shooting exhibition. The crowd of operators, a mix of Army Rangers, Marine Recon, and the captain's own Navy SEALs, chuckled nervously. They stood on the wind-swept observation deck of the high desert training facility, a place carved from rock and skepticism, where reputations were forged in brass and broken by the unforgiving physics of ballistics. The man speaking was Captain Marcus Thorne, callsign Hammer, a man whose ego was as polished and prominent as the gold trident on his chest. He gestured dismissively toward the lone figure prone on the firing line below, a woman whose silhouette seemed too slight, too still, against the vast, ochre landscape. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't turned. Her only response to the public dismissal was the slow, deliberate motion of her hand as she adjusted the parallax on her scope, a gesture of such profound indifference it was more insulting than any retort. But up on the deck, a four-star general, a man who had seen empires rise and fall in dust-choked valleys, saw her posture, the way her body formed a single, solid unit with the earth and her rifle, and he knew. He knew this wasn't about prayer. This was about faith, but not in a higher power. It was faith in mathematics, in muscle memory, and in a legacy forged in silence. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence below. Captain Thorne wasn't just skeptical. He was offended. The entire exercise, codenamed Operation Desert Spear, was his baby. It was designed to push his Tier 1 SEAL team to the absolute limit, a complex scenario involving a simulated high-value target protected by an entire platoon of hostile actors, spread across a network of bunkers nearly 3 miles away. The problem was the target's command node, a small, hardened structure represented by a 10-inch steel plate, which had to be neutralized simultaneously with the main assault to prevent a simulated data wipe. The conditions were brutal, a swirling, unpredictable 20-mile-per-hour crosswind, shifting mirage from the desert heat, and a range that laughed in the face of conventional marksmanship. Thorne had argued for a drone strike simulation, calling a ballistic solution impossible. That's when General Sterling, the exercise overseer, had quietly brought her in. Master Sergeant Eva Rostova. She had arrived with no fanfare, carrying a single, heavily customized Barret M107A1 in a worn Pelican case. She wore a sterile uniform with no unit patches, only her rank and name. To Thorne, she looked like a logistics clerk who had won a raffle, an administrative oversight sent to tick a box for joint operations inclusivity. His condescension was a performance for his men, a way of reinforcing his own authority by publicly questioning hers. "Look," he continued, his voice booming over the wind. "I appreciate the support, General, but we're burning daylight. We need a real-world solution. My breachers are ready to go, but they can't move until that command node is dark. Sending a 50 calories round on a 3-mile journey in this gale is just wasting ammunition. The Coriolis effect alone at that distance is a nightmare, let alone the wind drift and transonic instability. It's not a matter of skill, it's a matter of physics." He was technically correct, listing the litany of obstacles that made the shot improbable. He was an expert in the language of limitations. What he failed to understand was that some people don't speak that language. Down on the line, Rostova remained a statue of calm. She wasn't ignoring him. She was simply operating on a level where his voice, his ego, and his assumptions were just more environmental data to be filtered out, like the wind itself. The challenge had been set, not by words, but by the cold, hard reality of the scenario. The assault teams were in position, their comms crackling with impatient energy. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the distant mountains in shades of bruised purple and bleeding orange, and the changing light would soon make optics a liability. The window was closing. Down on the firing line, Master Sergeant Rostova began her ritual, a silent symphony of preparation that stood in stark contrast to Thorne's loud pronouncements of impossibility. Her movements were fluid, economical, honed by thousands of hours of repetition in places the official records would never mention. She didn't rush. She didn't seem to feel the pressure radiating from the observation deck above. Her world had shrunk to the few square feet of her shooting mat, the cold steel of her rifle, and the shimmering mirage dancing over the immense distance to the target. She produced a kestrel weather meter, holding it aloft not for a single reading, but for a full 2 minutes, watching the data streams, observing the subtle ebb and flow of the wind's velocity. She was not just measuring the wind. She was listening to its story, understanding its rhythm. Her spotter, a quiet Air Force sergeant who had arrived with her, lay beside her, his own focus absolute. Their communication was a sparse, clipped language of numbers and corrections. Temp 92, humidity 18%. Baro 29.92, falling. Rostova made a minute adjustment to her scope, her fingers moving with the delicate precision of a surgeon. The onlookers saw a woman dialing a knob. General Sterling saw a master artisan tuning her instrument, feeling the resonant frequency of the battlefield. Captain Thorne saw a woman delaying the inevitable, proving his point with every passing second. He scoffed, turning to one of his men. "See? This is what I'm talking about. A whole song and dance. By the time she's done her little science project, the target will have died of old age." The world fell away. For Rostova, there was no observation deck, no arrogant captain, no audience of skeptical operators. There was only the mission. The crosshairs of her scope settled, but they did not rest. They danced with her breath, a slow, controlled waltz. The data was processed, the calculations made not by a computer, but by the organic, intuitive supercomputer behind her eyes. Windage, a complex hold-off calculated for multiple wind zones between her position and the target. Elevation, an almost comical upward angle to account for the dramatic bullet drop over 5,000 yards. Spin drift, Coriolis effect, air density. Each variable was a note in a complex mathematical chord, and she was the conductor. Her spotter's voice was the final piece of data. Mirage is running left to right, 7 miles per hour. Send it on the next lull. Rostova didn't answer. Her body gave the only reply necessary. Her breathing slowed, then stopped, finding that perfect, still moment between heartbeats. The trigger finger, which had been resting on the frame, moved to the shoe of the trigger with a lover's familiarity. The pressure was not a pull, but a steady, inexorable squeeze, a gradual transfer of intent from mind to machine. The rifle roared. It was not a crack, but a deep, thoracic boom that seemed to shake the very bedrock of the desert. The concussion wave kicked up a plume of dust around her, but she did not move, her eye remaining glued to the scope, her body a perfect extension of the weapon, absorbing the violent recoil as if it were a gentle push. And then, there was the wait. A profound, agonizing silence stretched across the range, broken only by the whistling wind. The 50 BMG round, a 750-grain piece of precision machine metal, was on its journey. For nearly 7 full seconds, it was a ghost, an unseen messenger flying across a chasm of doubt. On the observation deck, everyone held their breath. Thorne crossed his arms, a smug, "I told you so" expression already forming on his face. And then, a flicker. A tiny, almost imperceptible flash of light from the distant target area, followed a full 2 seconds later by the faint, tinny clang of metal on metal, a sound that traveled back across the miles like an echo from another world. The 10-inch steel plate, the impossible target, rocked violently on its post, and then toppled over, disappearing into the scrub brush. Complete, deafening silence descended upon the observation deck. Thorne's jaw hung slightly agape. His smugness had vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He uttered the only words he could find. "No. No way. That's not possible." General Sterling let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the sheer improbability of what they had just witnessed to settle into the minds of every person present. He let Captain Thorne stew in his own disbelief, the foundation of his arrogant certainty shattered by a single, perfectly placed round. The general had seen this before, the moment when loud assumption collides with the quiet truth of competence. He walked slowly to the edge of the observation deck, his gaze not on the distant, fallen target, but on the still, prone form of Master Sergeant Rostova, who was already calmly beginning the process of clearing her weapon, her work done. Sterling turned his gaze to Thorne, whose face was a canvas of confusion and dawning humiliation. The general's voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind with the sharp authority of a lifetime of command. Captain Thorne, he began, his tone deceptively mild. Do you have a secure terminal up here? A junior officer, startled, pointed to a ruggedized laptop set up on a nearby table. Yes, sir. Right here. Sterling walked over to it, his boots making heavy, deliberate sounds on the metal grating. He never took his eyes off the SEAL captain. Pull up the personnel file for Master Sergeant Eva Rostova. Security clearance is Sterling Omega 9. The officer's fingers flew across the keyboard. A moment later, a heavily redacted digital file appeared on the screen. Thorne, drawn by an invisible force, moved to stand behind the officer, peering at the screen. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. The screen was a litany of blacked-out mission names and classified commendations. But some things weren't redacted. Unit designation, 24th Special Tactics Squadron. Combat deployments, 17, all classified. Special skills, Master Marksman, Joint Terminal Attack Controller, Advanced Force Reconnaissance. And then, there was a single-line item, a nickname entered under operational monikers. It simply said, The Ghost of Kandahar. Sterling gestured to the screen, though he was speaking to the entire assembled group of operators. Captain, you were talking about physics. About limitations. You made the assumption that you were dealing with a conventional marksman. You are not. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Master Sergeant Rostova is not a range support specialist. She is the individual the Joint Chiefs call when a situation is deemed ballistically unresolvable. The shot you just witnessed was not her most impressive. It wasn't even in her top 5-inch. The general's eyes scanned the faces of the stunned SEALs and Rangers. In 2012, during a sandstorm in Helmand Province with near-zero visibility, she neutralized a hostile mortar team from 2,815 meters, saving an entire platoon of Marines who were pinned down. The military owes the lives of 32 men to a shot that, according to your physics, Captain, was impossible. In Syria, she was the overwatch for a Delta Force hostage rescue. The target was inside a moving vehicle. She took the driver out through the side window from a helicopter in a crosswind. A shot that was, by all accounts, impossible. He turned his full attention back to Thorne, his voice dropping to a low, stern growl. You spoke of your men being the best in the world. They are exceptional warriors, no doubt. But you have just been given a very public and very necessary lesson in humility. You assumed her gender, her branch of service, and her quiet demeanor were indicators of her capability. You were wrong. That silence you mistook for uncertainty? That is the sound of absolute, unshakable confidence. It's the confidence of someone who has done the impossible so many times it has simply become her profession. He then turned and faced the firing line below. In a gesture that stunned every person present, General Sterling, a 4-star commander, drew himself to attention and rendered a slow, perfect salute to the Master Sergeant who was now packing her rifle. He held it, a silent, powerful testament of respect that echoed louder than any rifle shot. The story of the 5,000-yard shot, of the impossible made possible, spread through the base like a wildfire in the desert wind. It was not just a story about a remarkable feat of marksmanship. It became a parable, a piece of living folklore. In the mess hall that evening, the usual boisterous laughter of the SEAL teams was replaced by hushed, reverent tones. They spoke her name, Rostova, not with mockery, but with a kind of mythic awe. They called the specific firing point Ghost's Perch. Captain Thorne was a changed man. The public humbling had stripped him of his bluster, replacing it with a quiet, thoughtful introspection. The next morning, as Rostova was cleaning her rifle with the same methodical calm she displayed on the line, Thorne approached. He didn't make a speech. He didn't offer excuses. He simply held out a steaming mug of coffee. Master Sergeant, he said, his voice quiet and devoid of its usual arrogance. That was the finest display of skill I have ever witnessed. I was wrong. My assumptions were unprofessional and disrespectful. I apologize. Rostova looked up from her work, her gray eyes meeting his. She simply nodded, accepting the coffee and the apology in a single, gracious gesture. We all have our role to play, Captain, she said, her voice soft but firm. Yours is up close. Mine is from a distance. It was not a boast, but a simple statement of fact. Later that week, a young ranger, emboldened by Thorne's newfound humility, approached Rostova as she was mentoring her spotter. Ma'am, He began nervously. How do you stay so calm? How do you make a shot like that? Rostova paused her instruction and looked at the young soldier. You don't focus on the noise, she said. Not the wind, not the people talking, not the voice in your own head telling you it's impossible. You focus only on the fundamentals. Breathing, trigger press, follow through. Competence is quiet. You just have to do the work, and the work will speak for itself. The legend of Ghost's Perch became more than just barracks gossip. It became institutionalized. A photograph of the toppled steel plate, with a single, perfectly centered 50 caliber hole, was framed and hung in the main briefing room of the training facility. Underneath it, a simple brass plaque read, Master Sergeant E. Rostova, 5,017 yards. Competence is the only metric. Captain Thorne, to his credit, embraced his lesson fully. He became an advocate for a more integrated, less tribalistic approach to special operations, frequently using his own story as a cautionary tale against the dangers of ego and assumption. He ensured that every new team that rotated through the facility for training was told the story, not as a celebration of a single shot, but as a lesson in professional respect. He would stand before the young, confident operators and tell them, the most dangerous person on the battlefield is the one you underestimate. Look for the quiet professional. Learn from them. Because their silence is not empty. It is full of a skill and experience you can't possibly comprehend until you see it for yourself. Rostova, for her part, remained unchanged by the newfound fame. She deflected praise, gave credit to her spotter and her equipment, and continued her work in the quiet, unseen corners of global conflict. She was not interested in legacy, only in mission success. But her actions had created a legacy nonetheless, a ripple effect of change that would influence a generation of warriors. Her single act of quiet competence had done more to break down barriers of prejudice and ego than 1,000 diversity briefings ever could. It was a testament to a simple, powerful truth, that actions will always speak louder than words, and that true respect is not demanded by a loud voice, but commanded by a quiet, undeniable display of excellence. Months later, a new class of SEAL candidates was on the observation deck, listening to their lead instructor. It was Captain Thorne. He pointed down toward the firing line, toward the spot now permanently marked with a small, brass plaque. Down there, he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience, is where I learned the most important lesson of my career. It wasn't in BUD/S, and it wasn't in combat. It was right here. I learned that the insignia on your chest doesn't give you a monopoly on skill. I learned that your assumptions are your biggest enemy. And I learned that the calmest person in the room is often the most dangerous. He recounted the story of Rostova's shot, not with shame, but with a kind of reverent gratitude. The recruits listened, their own youthful arrogance tempered by the story. The legend had become a teaching tool, a foundational piece of institutional wisdom. The culture was slowly shifting, not because of a directive from on high, but because of the undeniable proof provided by one woman and her rifle. The legacy of that day was not the hole in a steel plate 3 miles away. It was the change in the hearts and minds of the warriors who witnessed it, and who would carry that lesson with them into every future conflict. True legacy isn't what you achieve for yourself. It's the standard you set for others to follow. It's the quiet competence that inspires excellence long after you've left the field, a silent echo that shapes the future. The wind still whips across that high desert range, carrying with it the faint scent of cordite and the whispers of legends. New soldiers come and go, each one hearing the story of the impossible shot. They learn that true professionalism has no gender, no single uniform, and no need for a loud voice. It is a discipline, a quiet fire forged in dedication and honed by countless hours of unseen work. The name on the plaque, Rostova, has become synonymous with a certain kind of excellence, the kind that does not seek approval but simply is. Her actions that day became a permanent part of the institutional soul, a reminder that the loudest voice in the room is often the most insecure, while true strength resides in the calm, steady hands of the quiet professional who lets their results do the talking. The world is full of noise, of boasts and braggadocio, of people who believe their own hype. But progress, victory, and honor are not secured by them. They are secured by the silent few, the ones who master their craft in the shadows, who face down impossibility with nothing more than practice, skill, and an unwavering belief in their own competence. Their arena is not the stage, but the field of action, and their applause is not the roar of a crowd, but the simple, satisfying sound of a mission accomplished. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.